Claire, where are you? The question drops like cold water into a room that smells faintly of antiseptic and cheap perfume, and the clock on the wall counts down with a patience that feels cruel. 20 minutes until the ceremony begins, and the corridors of the Hale Tower feel like the ribs of a city holding its breath. In the glass elevator, she presses her palms flat and feels the fabric of her dress wrinkle beneath her fingers, a seam of satin biting like a promise she did not make for herself. The ceremony is supposed to seal a contract written in boardroom ink and hospital ledger margins, a marriage arranged not by romance but by rescue. If she signs tonight, the Morgan Group escapes bankruptcy, the creditors retract their clause, and her father, tired and fragile from months of sleepless audits, keeps his dignity and his seat at the table. If she refuses, the inheritance evaporates like sugar in rain, the company collapses, and the man in the suite upstairs, Richard Hale, the CEO who has been in a coma for months, remains the decisive hinge on which fortunes rotate. She looks at her phone, at messages she cannot delete, even though each tone makes her chest constrict. We need you to do it for your family. It is temporary, Claire. You will be protected. There is a clause in the contract to secure the company. In the mirror of the lobby, she sees a woman whose smile has been negotiated, whose hands learned to steady ledgers rather than cradle dreams. I am a marketing graduate with debts and a stubborn sense of loyalty to a father who once taught me to measure risk with compassion, she tells herself, and that sentence tastes like metal and coffee. The air carries the distant clink of glass from the reception, a choir of footsteps, the dry whisper of an envelope being sealed. The contradiction is a blade. He is declared medically unresponsive by the hospital, yet the family has secured a marriage that seems to depend on him remaining absent. If he wakes, inheritance disputes will combust. If he does not, there are signatures waiting, transfers queued, a vault with a technology patent that would remake the Morgan legacy. Tonight will decide custody of that secret box, and a single wrong answer could destroy more than a balance sheet. Today, you will see transfer receipts, unedited audio messages, text threads, and a witness who kept a receipt for coffee as if it could map guilt. What would you do if the fate of a company and the life of your father hinged on a vow that feels mechanically composed rather than felt? The camera is not real, but the witness is, and the promise of this video is to lay bare the ledger entries and the whispered deals that no headline wanted to print. She remembers how it began, and the memory arrives like a backstory that she keeps in a locked drawer in her mind, the key worn smooth. 3 years ago, she was Claire Morgan, a woman who sold ideas in cold rooms, and whose father, Thomas Morgan, had built a small furniture business into a regional chain. They were proud, practical, scarred by market cycles, but stubbornly upright, until a hostile bid and a string of bad suppliers nearly ended them. The Morgan Group had become collateral in a chess game of board seats and leveraged buyouts. Claire took a job with a boutique agency and binged spreadsheets at night. She moved out of a one-bedroom with a kettle that whistled like a complaint. At 29, she had charisma enough to turn a failing product into a viral campaign, and courage enough to argue with investors who used phrases like "take no prisoners." She promised herself not to marry for money. She promised her father she would not watch the business die. The promise that brought her to Hale Tower was a simple trade-off offered by Marcus Delane, the company attorney and a man with a smile that smells faintly of cologne and ambition. Accept an arranged engagement with the heir apparent, and in return, the Hales will inject a rescue capital that would refinance the debt. Marcus said, "This is structure, Claire, not betrayal." He pressed a folder with bold signatures into her hand. In the years since, Claire has learned how to count the cost of every decision, how to weigh moral debt against literal debt, and how to sleep with her throat tight from worry. This backstory threads roughly 900 characters of patient memory into the fabric of her present. She remembers loved ones who taught her arithmetic and ethics, friends like Priya Shah who lent her an emergency loan when an invoice bounced, and a mentor named Daniel Ortiz who taught her to frame a narrative so investors would listen. Those memories act as ballast tonight while the family machine hums. At the elevator, she is met by Sophie, the head nurse who has a soft voice and a knot of keys clattering like small judgments. Sophie wipes her palms on a tissue and says, "Claire, Richard's monitors were stable this morning. Dr. Allen still recommends no change." Claire replies, "Stable how? He has been stable for months, and yet he is signing nothing." Sophie answers, "Family decisions are being made. There are signatures recorded at the notary. There are lawyers." The dialogue unfolds with a clipped cadence of people on duty and people on edge. "You should not be here," whispers Javier, the private security guard who smells of aftershave and old cigars, his fingers warm on the strap of his coat. "I have to be," Claire shoots back. "This is about the company and my father." "You understand they expect you to be the shield," Marcus Delane says when he arrives with a legal portfolio and a gaze that measures margins rather than faces. He unfolds a folder with "The dexterity of a man who lives in ledgers," and says, "There is a clause in the guardianship that permits the family to arrange a union if it secures the enterprise. It is a devastation of the heart, but a rescue of the books." Claire presses her lips together. Voices in the corridor knit a chorus: "Protect the heirs, sign, save the company." Her mother, Elisa Morgan, appears briefly, her perfume a faint echo of linen and lemon, her voice trembling. "Do what you must for Thomas." The scene is a ceremony of conflicting loyalties, and the sensory palette is stark. The antiseptic bite of hospital air, the silk of the dress under her hand, the metallic scent of coins being counted elsewhere, the sour taste of fear when she attempts to swallow, the muffled hum of a ventilation system like a distant engine. This opening block contains short, crisp lines, 3 urgent spoken exchanges, and a micro cliffhanger. A nurse passes a folded paper and says, "There is a transfer pending, 10 minutes ago." The question hangs, who will profit if she says yes? The second block escalates into the marriage that is less ceremony than ledger ritual. The chapel in the private suite is lit with a clinical glow. Candles burn with a waxy anonymity. Relatives line the seats like shareholders reviewing a presentation, faces polished with the civility of people who speak best in contracts. Claire walks the aisle with a tremor that tastes like iron and sugar, the flower petals crunching underfoot. "Vows are optional," suggests Victoria Hale, Richard's sister, voice trimmed in sarcasm, lipstick immaculate, a social predator in pearls. And at her side stands Edward Hale, the uncle whose laugh seems to be auctioneering futures. The wedding is populated by characters with jobs and grievances. Marcus Delane, the lawyer, Javier, security, Sophie, the nurse, Priya Shah, the friend, Daniel Ortiz, the mentor, Dr. Allen, the neurologist, and Lena Park, the notary who holds the legal weight of signatures. There are long exchanges, more than a dozen rapid lines of dialogue in the room's core as family members bargain in visible whispers about clause specifics and contingency plans. You understand the marital contract includes a clause for guardianship and a contingency transfer if he remains incapacitated for 6 months, Marcus says quietly. "We expect a child within the year, or a trust will be activated," Victoria adds, with a cruelty that tastes like steel. "That is monstrous," Claire answers. "It is legal necessity," someone retorts. The sensory map of this ceremony is rich. The silk rasp under a palm, the low thud of shoes on carpet, the sweet metallic tang of champagne on a tongue that does not wish to toast, the scent of lilies meant to mask this arrangement's sterility. During the ceremony, Marcus initiates a whispered negotiation, a flurry of 12 short bargaining phrases that read like an auction. A micro cliffhanger resolves into the explicit pressure. if Claire marries into the Hale legal structure, the Morgan debt will be cleared tomorrow via a scheduled transfer. If she refuses, the company goes to auction and creditors will execute claims. The camera of memory lingers on her father's eyes, red-rimmed and weary, as he mouths, "Do it," with a love that is indistinguishable from desperation. Soon after, the hospital room becomes a crucible of medical secrets and legal manipulations. The third block turns toward a medical crisis and the murky ethics that gather around a bed. The narrative delves into Claire's confrontation with the supposed coma. Monitors blink like constellations as Dr. Allen, a neurologist with hands like careful instruments, explains protocols. He speaks with a calm that tries to translate tragedy into procedure. An EEG shows low responsiveness, he says. Functional MRI suggests minimal cortical activity. We must consider prognosis and guardianship. Claire hears the words as riddles. The scene details technical procedures in a compact but precise passage of about 300 characters that explain the clinical steps taken to assess consciousness. Continuous EEG monitoring to detect cortical bursts, sedation weaning to observe spontaneous arousal, pupil reactivity tests under consistent lighting, standardized behavioral scales applied every 6 hours to measure command following and motor responses. The clinic language is sterile, the procedures described with a tone of clinical objectivity that contrasts with the emotional storm in Claire's chest. Sensory descriptions are dense: the sterile cloth against her fingertips, the beeping rhythms, the faint chemical smell of disinfectant mingled with the sweet tang of antiseptic wipes, the dull throb of fluorescent lights overhead. A nurse, Sophie, explains the medication chart and the recorded irregularities. "There was an unexplained spike 3 nights ago," she says. "The alarms went off at 4 a.m. Claire presses for records, and the room narrows into a set of accusations. Someone moved a drip, someone altered a chart, someone had motive to keep Richard unresponsive. Dialogue becomes accusation and counter-accusation, 12 to 14 tight exchanges in an interrogation of motives. "Who benefits if he remains out?" Claire demands. Victoria answers ironically, "Everyone who wants stability." Marcus interjects, in a voice that is equal parts lawyer and gambler, "There are signatures, Claire. We can proceed, but you should understand ramifications." The tension stretches into a clipped, charged moment of roughly 500 characters, where Claire reads an audio log aloud in front of the room, revealing a suspiciously timed phone call about a delay protocol placed before the family meeting to discuss the will. The suggestion of a conspiracy lands like a seed, sprouting questions and fear. Approximately 1/3 into this story, the narrative pauses with a direct appeal to the viewer, fitting the exact moment where empathy and action meet. If you were in Claire's place, what would you do? This is not a rhetorical ornament, but a space to gather opinions because the stakes are not merely clerical. If you were asked to marry to save a legacy and told the supposed heir was vegetative, would you accept the bargain to rescue your father's life work? Type save if you would choose the company's survival, or refuse if you would choose not to exchange your body or future for a balance sheet. Tell us in the comments why you pick that, because the choices here mirror dilemmas real families face when law, medicine, and money cross. Your answers help shape how stories like this are told, and we read every comment to understand what real people value when law and love collide. Now back to Claire, who folds the recorded audio into her hand like evidence and a prayer. The fourth block curves into a war for power, an elaborate game where papers and promises are the weapons. Rich descriptions of boardroom lighting, the metallic taste of coffee during strategy sessions, the scratch of stylus on legal pads, and the dry rustle of documents set the stage for meetings where signatures move as quickly as fortunes. Marcus Delane convenes a meeting with 5 to 8 named players: Victoria Hale, the niece of influence, Edward Hale, the uncle who controls production lines, Marcus, the lawyer, Javier, the security chief, Dr. Allen, the reluctant witness, Lena Park, the notary, Priya Shah, the friend who is now an unexpected ally, and Daniel Ortiz, the mentor who volunteers to audit transaction trails. They sit around a table under a chandelier that tastes of old money and dust, and documents slide like currency. There is a clandestine proposal to extract a secure device from Richard's private safe, a small vault that contains code for a software patent and a sealed envelope labeled simply Testament. The idea circulates as a plan cloaked in corporate jargon: restructure the trust, place the patent in a blind escrow, allocate a minority share to a shell company controlled by the family until Richard's guardianship is clarified. Dialogue is urgent and plentiful, primary scene exchanges number 12 to 14 and crackle with intent. "We retrieve the code and we recoup market control," Edward says, voice low. "It must be done with legal cover," Marcus insists. "Lena can notarize a transfer under duress protocol if guardianship is in effect," she offers, fingers stamping paper. Priya, who has become Claire's confidant, whispers, "There are receipts missing from the accounts. Someone is laundering the transfers." Daniel slams a hand on the folder. "We need forensics. We need bank trails." The sensory detail is thick: the weight of a legal pad in a palm, the bitter aftertaste of espresso, the roughness of paper edges, the soft tick of a wall clock, the cold of a window pane under a winter sky. The group debates the ethics of removing the patent and storing it in an off-site safe deposit. The plan veers dangerously close to theft or a lawful rescue, depending on who tells the story later. Claire is offered an operational role in the scheme: sign a consent that would grant the family temporary custody of the physical safe and its contents under the pretext of stabilization. The decision reads like a Russian sentence: "Do you consent to become both spouse and steward of ill-gotten salvation?" From boardroom strategies, the story tumbles into a moment of physical danger. The fifth block is an escalation and climax playground where seizing the safe, a midnight raid, a kidnapping attempt, and a poisoning attempt collide. There are 3 robust moments of tension, each stretched across 500 to 600 characters to meet the narrative demands of pressure and release. The first moment is a midnight break-in at the private wing, where Claire, guided by Javier and Priya, tries to access Richard's safe under a sky that smells of rain and exhaust. The scene is tactile and immediate: the metallic cold of the safe handle, the whisper of fabric as Claire's sleeve brushes the keypad, the low thump of distant traffic, the adrenaline in her throat that tastes like iron. Voices are short, clipped, 10 lines of urgent whispers intercut with small actions. "Now, watch the corridor. Do you see the light? The code." They meet a locked door and an unexpected security override triggered by an unknown hand. Cameras blink and their plan folds into a scramble. The second tense moment is an abduction. Claire is intercepted on the stairwell by masked figures who shove her into a car that smells vaguely of engine oil and stale air. Her hands press against synthetic fabric, her breath stamps little clouds in the night, and she hears a voice she recognizes, Victoria's, frighteningly nearby, giving orders. Take her to the guest house. She knows too much. The scuffle includes a scream that pierces the rain, the sting of a slap that tastes like humiliation. The third and longest tense moment is an attempt to poison a witness during an anniversary luncheon that was supposed to be reconciliatory. The food's texture, previously comforting, becomes a carrier of menace. The tartness of lemon is suddenly unbearable. The sweetness of a dessert is muddled with chemical bitterness. Claire notices a slight residue on the rim of a wine glass, a scent of almonds that doesn't belong, and the narrative plunges into 200 lines of accusation and rescue. Security intervenes, Javier fights, Marcus shouts legal orders, Dr. Allen calls for an ambulance. Claire collapses for a breathless moment and then fights back, regaining composure to demand tests. Each of these tension sequences is delivered with visceral language about the senses and precise dialogue that reads like a script of crisis. A rescue succeeds in part. The safe remains inaccessible, but the attempt reveals that someone within the inner circle wants Richard effectively removed from power by permanent incapacity. The sixth block leads toward partial resolution and revelation. The aftermath of the kidnapping and poisoning attempt yields confessions, forensic reports, and a courtroom of family members who finally stop acting like architects of a hostile takeover and begin to show human fracture lines. Forensics reveal altered medical logs and a suspicious transfer of funds to a shell company connected to a subsidiary managed by Edward. Technical details of the forensic accounting process are included in a concise passage of roughly 300 characters explaining how bank trails are reconstructed. Subpoenaed bank statements, cross-referencing SWIFT codes, time-stamped wire logs, and analysis of beneficiary accounts that expose obfuscated transfers. The language becomes a blend of legal granularity and intimate confession. Marcus, confronted with tangible traces, cracks. He confesses that he assisted in structuring a contingency after being pressured by Victoria and Edward, fearing for his career. Victoria, at last, unmasks a motive born of desperation rather than villainy. She believed the company needed a ruthless act to survive the takeover climate and thought temporary guardianship was a small sacrifice for survival. She admits to having been in contact with an unnamed recovery firm who advised delay tactics. Her tone shifts between sarcasm and regret in quick lines. "We thought we were saving the company, not killing a person." Dr. Allen testifies that the clinical signs were manipulated in paperwork, though the EEG readings remained ambiguous. And Lena Park produces notarized documents that were backdated under pressure. The narrative includes a 500 to 600 character-long moment of tension where the question of who ordered the modifications is slowly resolved through the revelation of text messages on a phone Claire saved. Delay protocol confirmed, sent from an account belonging to an executive with ties to Edward. The consequence is palpable: a family divided, legal cases opened, criminal investigations looming. Partial pardons and plea bargains are discussed in the low murmur of lawyers mapping outcomes. The seventh block is epilogue and transformation with 3 time markers that show the practical consequences and the emotional arc. 1 month later, Claire has negotiated a settlement that salvages a portion of the Morgan Group while granting the Hales temporary operational control under strict oversight. She has counsel from Daniel and support from Priya and has opened an emergency audit. The narrative describes the scene: an office warmed by late autumn sunlight, phone calls answered with a steadier voice, a ledger balanced but a soul ragged. Claire starts a small fund to support employees affected by the turmoil. This small gesture shows her shifting from pawn to strategist. At 3 months, the company stabilizes. The patent is placed in an independent escrow supervised by a court-appointed custodian, and a forensic audit uncovers enough to prosecute a small ring of conspirators. Emily Hale, a cousin who testified as a witness, is given immunity for cooperation. Claire finds a voice in public hearings, her testimony a blend of grit and measured integrity, and the sensory detail includes the dry hit of courtroom air, the echo of gavels, the scratch of pens. At 6 months, the transformation is tangible. Richard emerged from a suspiciously brief medical event into an uncertain recovery. His cognitive tests show improvement, and an official guardianship review restores some agency to him. The family is fractured, but a new charter for the companies is formed with clauses protecting small shareholders and instituting whistleblower channels. Claire creates a foundation to help families caught between medical uncertainty and financial coercion, using a portion of the settlement to fund legal clinics and counseling. The epilogue totals approximately 2,300 characters and is careful to show both public and private shifts. The company breathes again, relationships remain scarred, and Claire, who once walked an aisle to sign a fate she could scarcely own, now walks through a lobby where people glance with the respect of those who know a hard story turned into activism. Names of supporters are preserved. Priya Shah, who manages outreach, Daniel Ortiz, who joins the audit board, Javier, who becomes head of security compliance, Dr. Allen, who testifies for the prosecution, Marcus Delane, who receives a suspended sentence but later assists in reforms, Lena Park, who reforms notarization practices, and Emily Hale, who speaks privately about regret and the messy path to restitution. Along the way, there are confessions that double as small scenes of resolution, a final courtroom confrontation that plays like a denouement. Claire speaks in the public record with a voice shaped by hurt and resolve. She reads the message thread aloud, the tone steady, and the court listens as receipts, transfers, and recordings are placed into evidence. The narrative closes with practical consequences, a restructured board, legal settlements, a protected escrow for the patent, and a fund for families in legal peril. The concluding moral registers not as tidy redemption, but as a realignment. They saved a company, but paid reputations. They gained governance protections, but lost private peace. In the quiet after the tallies, Claire stands by a window and thinks of a child she might have had if the bargain had gone another way, of a father whose hair has gone grayer, but whose pride remains, of a man who awoke and must now confront a decade of choices. The final image is of her placing a small key into a glass box at the foundation opening, an action that makes a small public promise. If you want to see the original documents, the transfer receipts, and the unedited audio clips we referenced, subscribe and check the description where we link verified redacted files and timestamps. If this story moved you, leave a comment with save or refuse and why, and join our community where we discuss law, ethics, and family. The last line lingers. She saved a company, but found that salvation is not a place, it is a cost, and costs always ask for recalibration of the heart.